Alright, so welcome to my review on the short horror sci-fi thriller film produced by Jeff Buccellato and Mike Foley, which is called Eye Contact. Now, this is also starring David Bruce, Jason Goodrich, and Allison Mickelson. Now, this is a short horror thriller film. It's kind of an indie film. It's not super big, but I still think that this is a pretty deserving film, and overall I think it deserves a 3.5 out of 5 stars, or 7.5 out of 10 stars for me. It didn't necessarily overachieve or go below the standards I had in mind before viewing it. However, I thought it was fairly immersive with its fast-paced music, scares, and terrifying chases that it included throughout the film. Now, this takes place in a small area in New Jersey, USA, with the main character as a young adult female in a blue running outfit. Now, she's just out here on a trail looking for an enjoyable jogging exercise. As she ambulates through the trail and makes it up to a lighthouse, she decides to take a look around the area. She grabs onto the bars and just looks out. It's a nice beach, a nice, pretty empty area. But as she looks down, she notices that there's a dark figure standing below her on the dock. Well, her emotional state went from confused and startled to paranoid and shocked, and then terrified. She runs faster through the trail where she entered and runs to her house to call 911. Later, when she is found dead in her house, the authorities investigate the scene. Not much was found, but her dead body, or presumably her dead body, was left there. It's basically where it ends for this summary, and I think it needs, I don't think it really needs much work other than it's doing what it needs to do as a short, suspenseful horror thriller. I would like to comment, though, that it does raise the question about who would be the next victim of the shadowy figures, or the dark figures, to say, as now the original man seemingly converted the young woman into a dark figure just like him. About it for the little summary or recap of this film, but now let's move on from that and go into the critical statements and overall thoughts I have of this film and its elements of suspense, camera angles, music, special effects, and so forth. So, I'll be starting the story now. I'm actually pretty excited, so let's get into this. The film opens up with a slow and unnerving suspenseful soundtrack as the setting is introduced and the jogger is shown carelessly moving through a trail. This trail is close by to a beach or a little water bay, so it's also got a lighthouse next to it and whatever. But the unnerving factor is that there's nobody else around, that is, no other people that she could have alternate contact with. So she's not really thinking about this in the start of the movie anyways, because she's just taking a simple jog. However, the camera angle is moved from cut-in and more towards a cutaway and eye-level view for suspense. The lighthouse stairs are strangely a reddish color, which is actually kind of a strange color for a midday time of the day, But regardless, she carries on with her jog up the lighthouse to take a look around. She grabs onto the bars of the lighthouse and just takes in the view. There's a very nice beach below her, and there's virtually nobody there, so she gets a perfect view of everything. That is, the water, the sands, the birds, the seagulls, the rocks, the waves, just everything around her, and everything is so peaceful until she takes a look down below her. And there's something completely wrong. She takes a look below where she's standing and sees something like a dark and shadowy figure almost looking back up at her from the dock. Then there's this moment of just pure dread and shock when the camera zooms in on the figure and the music grows louder. It also shows up a close-up of the woman's face, just completely filled with fear as she is holding onto these bars and seeing just something so strange as a dark figure looking at her that's just a completely unknown and unnatural thing for anyone to come in contact with. I mean, this is probably something that the character has never ever seen before. Sure, it could just be anything, but the character definitely gets a bad feeling from this and feels as if she's being watched. And with that, she just decides to continue on and descend back down the lighthouse. Not necessarily avoiding the figure, but just continuing back down her route. And we get a little jump scare here when she turns around and assesses that the character must be sentient, because the dark figure literally appears just where she was in the lighthouse, and there's obviously no way that it wasn't there before because she was literally looking at it right down from the lighthouse, seeing it at the dock. Now the film starts speeding up, where she runs a little bit quicker and goes down the trail a little bit faster, looking behind her, paranoid for any time that the figure might reappear, as now she's seen it already twice, and now that she knows that it can move, she's quite a bit spooked at this point. Now everything starts speeding up with the camera angles and the movement and the music, and she keeps trying to look around her to see if she can find the creature or the figure anymore. As she gets off the trail, she tries to catch her breath, but when she looks around her, she finds the figure standing right there and continuously sprints down exhaustedly through the trail, forest, thin dirt roads, and tries everything to get back to her house to call the police. But as she finally gets out of the forest, the use of the mid-shot, wide-shot, low-angle, eye-level, and even slanted and shaky camera movements all serve their purpose in the final chase to show the physical and emotional setting of the character changing. She makes it to her house. She, of course, trips right before the ghost, because this movie is no exception to mainstream horror movie elements, and includes a MacGuffin when she trips right in front of the ghost or the shadow figure. Right before she's able to make it to her house in enough time, unlock and close the door just before the figure gets in. However, she's not safe because the shadow figure is actually able to go through walls just like a ghost, and she doesn't know that she's looking around, in front of her, behind her, as she tries to frantically dial 911. But at the last few seconds of this clip, we see that there's a small cutaway angle that shows the bottom half of the figure and the landline phone crashing to the floor. So we basically get an idea that the figure has killed her, taken her, or something of that nature, and she's gone, as you hear a small little, barely even audible shriek from her. And I'm pretty sure that's the only thing that she has ever said during the entire movie, or the only noise that has ever come out of her. But I could be wrong, because the music was blaring right as the landline tumbled to the floor, so that could be just part of the music. I'm not gonna go over much of the last part of the movie where the authorities came over and investigated, because it's just kind of a small part of the movie. However, that was probably a hint to another possession happening, or another person being turned into a dark figure. Not really any suspense happening during this part of the movie. However, the last shot where it does a close-up of the guy's face is kind of suspenseful and gives a pretty nice scare for the rest of the film, as it continues in about 5 more seconds till the movie ends, which gives you a bit of a hint and a little bit of a thing to think about once the movie ends. Okay, so that was it for that part, and now I'm going to go over my critical assessment of what I think is bad and good and semi-well done. So, as I've already assessed that this film shows signs of mainstream horror elements, it does them pretty well in my opinion. It's not too bad though. There are a few minor gripes I do have with the overall film, however, and just to start things off, this is kind of funny, but I don't think there was any apparent eye contact displayed between the main character and the figure. I mean, it was hard to tell if that was actually even possible, because it was just a dark figure, especially since it doesn't have any eyes and it was an embodiment of a shadow. But the real gripes start here though. We got off on a funny start and all, but this is just going to be constructive criticism from now on. But stay tuned, because I still feel like this is important to talk about. To start things off, there are no apparent, eye contact stuff that I noticed. But for one thing, the character says absolutely nothing during the entire film. I mean nothing, like no audible noises, no words, just nothing of nothing. Just, it doesn't add anything, and I think a lot of people in the IMDb reviews were complaining about this being a little bit annoying and dumb. But at the same time, I feel like I gotta give it to them for like a different perspective kind of way, and like it changes up how a horror movie works. Yeah, sure, the character's not expressing any sort of panic, which I'm sure we all would have done if we were actually in a horror movie ourselves, but In this case, there's no noises, but I feel like the camera angles, the well-timed soundtrack, it was well-timed to the moment and the chases and whatnot. And I feel like it just appropriately substitutes the fact that there's no audible sounds coming from the character. It just creates a different tone of panic, but I can still see that it's a little bit of a downfall for the movie in a way, because there's not really much realism when the character, isn't just freaking out, maybe saying a few bad things, or, just being a little bit more humanized than just kind of running away with absolutely nothing but just an expression and some suspenseful music. It's still alright, but I would have liked to hear something, at least just something from the character at one point in the movie. Another thing, though, is that, when the character gets involved with the figure, it's alright at first, but then as it goes past the rising action, the figure gets way too overused, and the entire suspenseful factor takes a toll due to the constant use of jump scares and reappearances. What I mean is that, after the first and second contact where she sees the figure at around the third point, and when she's on the trail, it appears way too much, and it just kind of loses its scare factor in a way, because it's just not like a jump scare anymore. You're almost expecting it. Okay, now lastly, I want to say that the short-length film concept is a fine concept that they used, but I think the ending and the theme overall is a little lackluster, especially since, I feel like it needs a sequel or a better explanation of what it's really talking about, or what's really going on, and why. I mean, here's a few questions that I just whipped up on a jiffy. So, why was the main character being followed? What really happened to her and why? Also, why was the coroner being followed? Where did this figure come from? What does it want? And why? Get ready for a bonus tangent here, because I'm going to complain about the quality. So, why was the film only in 360p? It doesn't look horrible, but for a short film in 360p, I just feel like I gotta address it, because it just isn't really cutting it. Even in 2008. I believe cameras in 2007 to 2008, when this movie was being filmed, were definitely better than 360p, especially even budget cameras for this time. Can't totally trash on them for this, though, because they're definitely resourceful for their production budget at the time, which I believe was more or less $1,000 for the whole movie, which is not much at all, and I'm sure anyone who doesn't know or does know anything about movies would know that $1,000 is just barely enough for a movie. So, I mean, they did a good job with hiring all the cast members and whatnot. But all in all, I gotta say that the entire film as a whole just wasn't half bad, because it had a decent rising action and a creeping dread that definitely had me hooked, even though it wasn't a professionally produced film. So I'd say it's worth a watch. Other people would say otherwise, but that's their opinion. It's just an 8-minute movie. You can just go watch it on YouTube. It's fine. It's worth a watch, I think, and it's not something that's totally mainstream for a horror movie. It's got a little bit of a different twist to it, which I think is what makes it sort of unique in a way. And for that, I think it's worth watching, and it deserves the 3.5 out of 5 stars. Hey, thanks for listening, and go check out the film if you haven't already. Alright, bye-bye.